Hi again. So awkward, awkward, super awkward. Getting over being awkward. Okay, I'm keeping it. um, yeah. Okay. So, um, yeah, I have a particular roommate that is particularly noisy. Um, you know, I have a subject, I have some art supplies to talk about, but it's you and me here, right? So let me just go ahead and vent for a second. I know it shouldn't be my style to put too much energy towards these things, but what I don't understand is how there can be an inclination when an entire house is completely silent to make noise, singing all the time, and bad singing at that, loud bad singing at that, all the time. Early in the morning, arguing loud on the phone, all day long on the phone almost, and one of the loudest people on the phone I've ever encountered in my existence. Stomps in a very creaky kind of place, which is understandable that it makes noise, but you walk like a fucking elephant, and slamming doors, not closing them, slamming every door multiple times. Slam the door, walk down the hall, walk back, slam the door. 5 minutes later, going to a different place, coming back, slamming the door. Coming into the house, slamming the door. Slamming the gate that's outside of the front door, knowing that it bounces open, it doesn't stay shut, you have to hold it and lock it for it to stay shut. But slamming that too. You have to have a certain kind of mind for all of those things to just be your normal mode of operation. You really do. Like, to me, it's fucking insane. It's crazy. And so, like, but it's been a test for me to be tolerant, because what I didn't want to do is become like intolerant to living with others. And when I first got here, I have like 7 other roommates, and yeah, and I thought it was going to be harder, but what I discovered was that it was just me having to adapt to like a new style of living, because you have to get like your place in order, and moving kind of puts you in a certain mind frame. Like, you have to have a certain understanding that I learned that I have to have a certain understanding that when I'm in the process of moving, things aren't going to look, you know, finished and in place. And so I had to really put that into my mind, because I was stressing myself out with some things unnecessarily, but I was. And then I would look around and be like, oh, I have stuff, piled in my room. And it's like a neat pile. Well, I made it neat, but as soon as it gets a little bit unneat, I'm like, ah. And that's just like a psychological thing, what I've learned, but it's still something that I have to like keep in check. And then with this one, I had to keep myself in check with that shit too, because that's crazy. And she lives directly across the hall from me. And I think it's one of the rudest types of ways that you can be. I really do. I can take a whole lot of shit, but when it comes to stuff that is like almost borderline intentionally disruptive to a community, like, I'm just like, man, because I mean, the place will be quiet, And then you hear, like, as soon as the person comes in, a slamming door, hard walking, slamming door, loud singing. And the place was silent before your ass got here. That to me is like the most selfish thing, because that's no like consideration for how the place was, you know. So I at first was like pissed, and then I was like, I gotta get my mind right, because I know this has to be a test. But living with somebody, like, there's different levels, you know. There's like tolerance that you have, like in this situation there's a tolerance because, you know, you signed up for dorm living, and I'm significantly older than everybody that I'm living with by like 20 years, which is fun because a bank teller the other day thought I was about 20, and I was like, yes. But I'm almost 40, and so I have to remember how I was in college. Like, you know, I've had to work over the years of washing my dishes on time and keeping stuff clean, and I have to remember that, you know. And I think I've gotten pretty cool, you know, because at first I was like, oh, there's dishes in the sink, and oh, this isn't clean. And then I was gonna have to be like, yo, like, you know, like pump the brakes. Were you like that when you were an undergrad? And to a degree, I was. I remember having a filthy ass roommate. I still remember her to this day. There were 4 of us living, 4 girls living in a 4-bedroom apartment, and she would just be gross. And it would be so ridiculous because even back then I'm kind of like, don't you see that you stand out like really bad, like in a nasty way? But I had to kind of meet people where they are when it comes to a certain kind of tolerance, you know. That one was a harder kind of stretch, but I felt like I was being prepared for having more tolerance in the future as far as living conditions go. And I don't think that I'm that harsh. I think I'm pretty flexible. I think there's just a few things that get on my nerves. But those different levels that I was talking about, like, I don't even know this person's name. We've never had a conversation. I just know from the yelling and the conversations about people calling her selfish and how she says that she's not selfish, yelling these things on the phone all hours of the morning and night while slamming doors. That's all I know about this person. I feel like as if we spoke, and it, you know, that would make things maybe better, unless they're just a complete asshole. And that's kind of like where I am. I'm like, you're just that person, you know. Other people I've spoken with, so, and they've been real cool. So when I see them like, we're doing whatever, it's like they kind of have like a free pass, and that kind of goes back to those levels. Like if you're living with somebody in a relationship and you love them, like, unless they're a kid, like literally a kid, like, you know, like, unless you have like kids that are doing stuff, there's a leniency with that too, but they kind of have to be like instructed because they're kids. But even if you had like a, like, let's say the extreme of like a kid-like adult, but you like love that person and you like understand them, there's a completely different mind frame that comes along with that kind of territory. It turns into something I think that would just be cute. Like, oh, you know, you didn't know how to wrap this properly, or oh, you didn't do this because whatever. It just, like, everything turns into cuteness versus somebody who's just stepping on toes and you don't know them from Adam. There's a huge difference. So, a little side note to start this video off with. But yeah, I went supply shopping, art supply shopping the other day, and I'm really sorry. There's no microphone, and I'm trying not to speak loudly because what I've noticed is that I speak louder than how I prefer to speak. I hear people who speak like really quiet and low, and it's like, I'm like, dude, you're fucking whispering, but I like it, you know. I always heard Americans were loud, and now I'm seeing. And then you turn up the volume and it's some astronomical shit, like whoa. So now I'm really trying. It feels kind of unnatural, you know. Even this one girl, she's Okay, this is gonna sound racist, but it's not. So there's this girl, and I think her name is Raina, and she is an eater, like a professional eater, like big eating. And so I've watched her go around like California, because that's where she lives, and she's American. She's Chinese heritage, and I guess like her parents are Chinese because she speaks Chinese, but she's really California, like through and through. So right now she's been in Japan doing eating challenges, and what I've noticed is that, and she looks kind of Japanese, like I thought she was Japanese when I saw her there, and when she couldn't read anything, I was like, she's not Japanese, but she like really looks Japanese, but turns out she's Chinese. And usually I'm pretty good, like to a certain degree, but some people really just are ambiguous, or they really do look like whatever. So you know how it goes. So when I look at her, even though like her style is like borderline Japanese, borderline American, because she doesn't look completely American, but she doesn't look like her style isn't completely Japanese either. But she's like right on the edge, you know. It's kind of California-ish, you know, but with heavier girl makeup. So she goes into like that realm of the Japanese girl, like that style of like heavier makeup. I hope I'm not being racist, but I'm just trying to, there's a real thing here, and I think I have enough leniency maybe to talk about these things. Do I sound like that person? But when I look at her, I'm looking at her amongst people who she looks like she could fit in to this community of people. She doesn't stand out in any way except for when she starts to speak. Besides her speaking English, she speaks so much louder than everybody else. And she's not even speaking that loudly, like to me, you know, like when she's in an American setting, it's like normal. But to see somebody who could pass for Japanese amongst people who are Japanese in Japan, it threw my mind off a little bit, because I've never seen anything like that before. It was a very bizarre like landscape, you know. But it's so hard for me to speak like quietly like that. I don't know. It's a thing. But anyway, so I went not grocery shopping. I mean, I did kind of go grocery shopping. I got some basmati rice, and I'm hoping that it's good. Because I'll tell you, like, I've tried cooking like Indian rice, and you know when you get basmatis, how it has like that fluffiness. I've never been able to, so I got some that was in a bag. And if it turns out from a bag to be like on point, it's gonna be amazing. Like I've gotten rice, I've gotten Japanese rice in the microwave containers, and it's pre-made. So you know, you're coming from like a disadvantage, just you know, with pre-made rice. With Japanese rice, I know how to cook it at least to a certain working degree where it's somewhat normal. The other rice, like, you know, it's come out watery and gross, and I don't know if it's the kind of rice I'm using. Like the Indian rice, just nowhere near, and then it's like kind of seasoned. So I'm hoping that this rice, even though it's pre-made, will have like the same end result as the other packaged rices that I've had. Excuse me. So back to the art supplies. Watercolor, man. Just like seeing the word is like bizarre, you know, because I don't know, it makes me feel kind of way, you know. Even my disposition now, it's like I feel like I immediately change, you know. I'm like, this is what happens when I start thinking about like watercolor. Like I haven't used watercolors in probably, I don't even know, 20 years. I cannot remember the last time that I used watercolors. I know how to use them to a certain slight degree, but I can't remember like, when? And honestly, I mean, what's today? Wednesday? Keep it real Wednesday. I mean, I was always anti anything that used water because I felt like it wasn't the supreme paint. There are certain artistic mediums that I personally have deemed as being supreme. Watercolor, acrylic, gosh, they're definitely not in there. Pastels, drawings are in a different category to me. They're practice. So any drawing that there is, it's not as bad as like the water-based paints, because I feel like people take those pretty seriously. And I take oil paints the most seriously. I feel like this conversation just went from like ha 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 to like and sorry, it just happens. And there's no offense to like acrylic painting. I've seen good acrylic paintings, but keep it real Wednesday, I'm always like, dude, why are you even fucking with that shit? Just move to the real medium. The payoff is better. It's harder to do. It's more to work for, you know? It's more of a challenge. For it's the cleanup is easier with acrylic, and oh, you know, it's less toxic and it's cheaper. Yeah, that's all the things that make it like cheesy. One of the supreme mediums to me are sculpture in like marble or stone. Welding sculptures together, that falls a little shorter unless you're achieving like a point of realism. Yeah, but even if it just falls short. And I know this is so compartmentalized, like I know it's so like strict to a point where it doesn't make sense. But sculpture in stone or marble, because the mediums are the tools involved are expensive, and it takes a higher degree of skill and a higher amount of time. Oil paints, because they're more expensive, they're harder to use, the color payoff is better. Tattooing, but certain kinds of tattooing, definitely Japanese traditional, for real. That's beyond. There are people I've seen that tattooing is definitely one of the biggie mediums, like nothing below it. But there's different ranks, because what I've seen in tattoo artists is that there's some that can achieve this high degree of realism, but all the portraits, if you notice, look the same. Like, they do this, it's like these hyper realistic portraits, but it's bizarre because you have so many artists that are able to achieve that level and have portraits that look like the same artist did them, you know? And I'm like, they must be using like the same like mapping techniques, and I don't even know, like the ones that look like those geographical maps that show elevation, it's kind of like that. And I'm like, there's something in this technique that just seems like, and even with Japanese traditional, even though the subject matter is coming from the same place, there's so much of a differentiation between artists that it's like instantly recognizable who's doing what, in what way, and what they did differently. You see, there's not that same end result when it comes to these hyper realistic portraits, and I'm very much in appreciation of these portraits, you know, because I'm like, I don't even achieve that you know, degree of realism when I'm drawing or painting. So the skill level, I just assume, is just higher than mine. Maybe I have a different kind of skill in a different way, but as far as like portraiture, realism and tattooing, that's beyond, way beyond anything that I have ever done or ever thought of doing. Even when I was tattooing, I would tell people I wasn't ready to do portraits. And I didn't have like a whole lot of clients, you know, but there were like my limitations. Like, no, I'm never going to attempt that because I don't even know, just no, you know. So, other biggie mediums. Gosh, I can't even think of any, to tell you the truth. I can just think of ones that, you know, colored pencil. Like, these things aren't bad. Like, you know, watercolor is kind of on its own because, like, there is a certain thing that's achieved. I think it's just I've never really seen watercolors that I've appreciated, you know. And I've had this thing in my mind where it's like realism or bust, you know. And the watercolors I've seen just in my experience, especially in life, like, you know, like looking at them, everyone's have pretty much looked the same, you know. Like, it's not like totally the same, but there's that feeling. So when I'm going into it now, I'm hoping that I bring something that feels like me to the medium. And I'm hoping that's what my strength is. That's what's been tried, you know, attempted to be communicated to me, is that my strength is that I have a distinction about my style no matter what the medium. So what I'm hoping is that that lends itself to my approach to watercolor. And I'm also hoping that it's going to be the same attempt in gouache, because what I did is I bought a book of watercolor paper, which I love drawing on watercolor paper. That texture and the weight of the paper is killer. Like, there's nothing better than drawing on watercolor paper. Like, or hand stretched canvas where I could choose the canvas that I want and stretch it myself. It's a totally different feeling than pre-made, you know, canvases. I did buy some pre-made canvases. I bought some canvas board. I bought some deep canvases, and they're smaller. Like, I think 5x7 is like the biggest, and then it goes to like 4x4 and 5x5. Yeah, so I have that kind of variety happening for the canvases that I bought. So the canvases will be for the gouache, the watercolor paper will be for the watercolor. I bought some new tiny brushes because I'm hoping that that will help me when I get to the smaller canvases. I've seen this thing on Instagram, and I'm trying not to be too copycat, but these like micro realistic landscapes, I was like, that would be perfect, you know, because